achieved.
Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. As always, I am your host, Scott Johnson, and on this episode of the show, we're breaking down the upcoming UFC Fight Night 28 event, which will take place on September 4th, and it brings to the end an incredibly busy 8-day schedule, which saw the UFC host 3 events. We had UFC Fight Night 27, which I'll talk about briefly, UFC 164, which actually has not taken place as of recording this, and of course this event, UFC Fight Night 28. So UFC Fight Night 27, I did very well. I went 8-3 overall, and it was a card that had 5 upsets. I could have had a slightly better record, as I felt the Abel Trujillo knees were legal, and he should have won that fight via knockout. I thought they just grazed the chin, and the original point of contact was the chest. Nonetheless, I'm also a little disappointed in myself. I originally was on Takei Mizugaki to upset Eric Perez, and I switched to Perez feeling he would do just a little bit more to steal a split decision. Didn't happen that way, but nonetheless, I pulled off major upsets, taking Court McGee and Darren Elkins, who paid very well. Also had Zach Cummings smash the heck out of that fight and made a bunch of money off that. My bet packs have been doing fantastic, especially since I put the new betting profiles together. They've been making some serious money and selling very well. $10 for this event. I've got some serious underdogs lined up for UFC 164. So I encourage you to buy them if you haven't already. And I've also got some underdog picks and some money-making picks here for this event as well. So please buy them. Also, the public picks are open. And the Kamikaze Overdrive Prediction Tournament, this is event number 2 of 3, which will send 2 competitors into the championship round. So very exciting there. I hope you've been following along and following these guys, because they really know their stuff, and they're breaking fights down very effectively. And been doing a heck of a job. This is a fantastic-looking fight card. We've got lots to get into, lots to talk about, so let's get to my first prediction of the evening. We kick things off in the UFC's ever-expanding flyweight division as Marcos Vinicius, 25-1, battles Russian and debuting flyweight Ali Bagautinov. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Marco Vinicius has lost his last fight. Johnny Bedford is now 1-1 in the UFC, while Bagautinov has won, 8 consecutive fights fighting outside of the UFC, mostly in his home nation of Mother Russia. Now, taking a look here, Vinicius, he started off cutting from 145. He's an Ultimate Fighter Brazil veteran. He cut from 145 down to 135, where he fought Johnny Bedford, and now he's cutting flyweight. At 5', he's a pretty big flyweight. We'll talk about that briefly. Another thing with the Brazilian, he's fighting at home, which is a huge advantage, but he's coming off almost a 9-month layoff, and a lot of that could be attributed to him wanting to make a proper physical change to his body and not just trying to cut some water weight and get down the 10 pounds needed to get down to flyweight. But that 9 months still can be a significant weight cut, or a significant time away when you're dealing with a new weight cut. That's another major difference. Vinicius is a BJJ black belt, 13 wins by submission, and he's never been submitted in his pro career. But he has had issues on the ground. He was taken down by Johnny Bedford a couple times in that fight. Now, the first time Bedford took him down, he locked up a guillotine very quickly and went after it right away, but he was smart and let it go because he knew he didn't have it, didn't want to gas his arms out. But he did struggle with Bedford on the mat, and in his debut at 145, he struggled with Wagner Campos on top, who was really beating him up. And he was also submitted by Godofredo Pepe on The Ultimate Fighter when he was eliminated for the second time in that tournament, actually. So certainly not impenetrable on the ground. His chin's a little bit questionable as well. He does have 7 wins by knockout, but he's been stopped twice in his career. We saw Bedford drop him, and he took a lot of damage in that Wagner Campos fight as well, before eventually knocking him out with a big shot in the third round, rallying back in a fight he was clearly going to lose should it go to the judges. Now, he has a little bit of trouble keeping up with the strikes landed. 1.88 strikes landed per minute versus 2.99, so his opponent has some success teeing off on him, and that's not something you want to do, especially if you go to decisions a lot, is get behind on the striking totals. Bagautinov, he's a vast grappling background, very high level. He's a combat Sambo champion, also a background in freestyle and Greco-Roman wrestling. He actually has a professional boxing fight, which he won. Overall in his career, 4 wins by submission. He throws a lot of sub attempts off his back and on top, very aggressive with his takedowns, and good takedowns, slam takedowns, which are very hard to defend against. He seems like a very strong individual, very strong top game with his submissions and his ground and pound. He's very powerful and aggressive with his striking, 4 wins by knockout as well. Really works guys over and busts them up on the mat. Vinicius is going to have a size advantage here at 5'8" compared to 5'4", which is going to should help him out. But at the same time, again, it's that long layoff and that new weight division, which can be an issue. Where Bagautinov, he's got more experience fighting at flyweight. He should be a little more settled in. Then again, he has the UFC debut in his corner, which should be causing some jitters. And fighting in Brazil is never easy. Either way, Ali Bagautinov, I'm a little more impressed with what I've seen from him. Vinicius, I just haven't liked what I've seen. I'm going to take Ali Bagautinov to defeat Marco Vinicius. I'll take him to do it by TKO. Continuing now, we move to the 185 versus Rafael Natal, 16-4-1. Battles Thor the Hammer, shockingly enough. Troeng, 16-4-1. Natal has won 2 in a row, and had it not been for a come-from-behind win by Andrew Craig, would be on a 5-fight winning streak. While Troeng has won 5 in a row and is coming off a UFC victory over Adam Sella, which was his promotional debut. Now, as far as I'm concerned, Rafael Natal hasn't looked very good in his last 2 outings, and he's faced undersized, short-notice replacement opponents, and he's won both of them, but he did not impress me that much in either one of those fights. Now, Rafael is a BJJ black belt, 8 wins by submission, good takedown numbers, 3.09 takedowns at 43%, and defensively a 77% takedown defense, so pretty solid numbers there. He scored multiple takedowns against a pretty good judo player in Michael Kuiper, which was quite impressive. In his last fight, which was one of his criticisms, he spent a lot of time fighting in that 50-50 guard, looking for leg locks, and it was a really awkward situation. I'm hoping to see something completely opposite from that, him going for top position as opposed to trying to hold that position and grind it out. Troeng, he's a very strong grappler, good body lock takedowns, 6 wins by submission. He trains at Alliance MMA, so some good grapplers there, so certainly working to round it out. He's aggressive on the ground. He will pass and smash through his opponent's guard with punches, and when they look to defend the punches, he tries to hop through and get half guard and move to maybe the mount. Good transitions from the guard, said to and we saw against Sella, he went from guard to half guard to back control, and eventually locked up that submission victory, which was quite impressive. And he has experience fighting BJJ black belts and good guys in the ground, facing both Lucio Linares, and Talis Latis, and he held his own on the mat in both those fights, but he lost them. And one thing I saw in those matchups, he was actually taking both Latis and Linares down, which isn't the greatest strategy. And in both those fights, he was getting swept and put on his back. He has been submitted twice in his career. One of them was by Talis Latis, the other was by Muhammad Khalidov, which is quite impressive, as he is, a top-level guy. So he has some experience against elite-level guys. Troeng's, he's a serviceable striker, but nothing overly flashy. Seems more focused on grappling. He does have 6 wins by knockout, but some of them are ground-based TKOs. As far as I saw, Natal, when he fought Andrew Craig, he was out striking him and landing some good leg kicks until he got knocked out. As I said, he's decent leg kicks, a nice jab. He rocked Craig a couple times with strikes. He will use some feints and fakes to set up his strikes and his takedown attempts. He does have 3 wins by knockout, but he's also been knocked out 3 times, so his chin's a little bit of a question mark. But again, I don't know if Thor has the capabilities to test that on the feet here. Natal should be the better striker as far as what I've seen, and his ground game should also be, the advantage should be his on the mat. Again, also Natal fighting at home should help him as well. And the thing with Troeng, as I question his fight IQ, as he took on guys like Talis Latis and Luciano Linares, and these are guys that their specialties in the ground, and he was shooting for takedowns. Latis threw a kick in the opening seconds of that fight, and Thor jumped right on it and took him down, and that's what Latis won, and it immediately got swept. And I think he's going to try and go after Natal on the ground. I think it's a mistake. So my prediction is Rafael Natal to defeat Thor Troeng by submission. Moving right along to the UFC's lightweight division, Francisco Trinaldo, 13-2-0, battles debuting Polish fighter, 13-1-0, Piotr Hallmann. Trinaldo has won 2 in a row and is now 3-1 in the UFC, while Hallmann has put together a pretty impressive winning streak, 9 consecutive victories for the Polish fighter. Now, Trinaldo first, he is a huge lightweight, very strong. He cuts a lot of weight. So if he has a bad weight cut, like another fighter he's already fought in Gleison Tibau, does it bring up a cardio issue if the fight goes that far? He is fighting in Brazil, which is always an advantage for the Brazilian fighters. 5 wins by submission overall, arm triangle wins in back-to-back fights, and he trains BJJ under Sergio Moraes, so that's very impressive and a high-level guy to be working with. Takedowns, 1.54 takedowns at 50%. He also averages 2.05 subs per 15 minutes, so he's got some good, he's very active on the mat. Punch and clinch for takedowns, huge slams and suplexes once he gets that body lock. We saw him throwing around CJ Keith pretty significantly, and he's very strong with the underhooks and the clinch, both offensively and defensively. That's not a position you want to tangle with Trinaldo in. In his last fight against Mike Rio, he locked up an arm triangle from the half guard position, which is a very rare and unheard of submission, and it just shows how strong he is with those arms. He was able to squeeze up on Rio and eventually force the tap. He has good transitions, excellent ground and pound, but he did get swept by CJ Keith, but he attacked with an armbar off his back. So again, very good on the mat. 57% takedown defense overall, and those numbers could be a little bit misleading because in the T-Bow fight, Gleison was a very strong grappler, went 5 or 6 in takedowns. Every other fighter combined has thrown 7 attempts at Trinaldo and gone 1 for 7 overall, so certainly can shut opponents' takedowns down. That's not a question. He also will punish his opponents on their attempts with knees and elbows. We saw that in his debut against Delson Heleno, which was quite impressive. He throws a low stance, both offer some opportunities to defend takedowns, shoot for takedowns, and come over the top of that big power striking game he has. Now, Hallmann, he's debuting, good ground and pound, practices BJJ, good takedowns, like single leg, he'll look for a kick and try to capitalize on that. Also that body lock position, and he's got good scrambles on the mat. He has decent takedown defense. He will also punish his opponent when they shoot in with punches and elbows, but he can be taken down. We've seen a couple of fights where he's been put on his back. He's never faced this level of a grappler before, offensively or defensively, and it'll be interesting to see how he responds. On the feet, he has a big right hand, decent combinations. He stays very active. One of his best weapons is the tie clinch, where he can throw some knees from. I haven't seen him get dropped before in some fights, and his one TKO loss, his only career loss, was due to an illness in a 4-round. The fight was in the 4th round. He was forced to retire, which is unfortunate, but it shows how durable and tough this guy is. 8 first-round finishes, very good finisher. He's a durable fighter, also a hard worker, very active. Now, in his fight against Vasco Mikosovic, we saw him get dropped with a big shot, and he also got caught in an arm bar, and he survived both, but still it shows he's a little bit vulnerable in those senses against guys who are a little bit more talented and higher up. Now, Trinaldo, he's a kickboxing champion. We saw him drop Gleison T-Bow with that big power shot. He has that overhand left hand, which is gigantic, generates a lot of power, big-time power, lots of feints and fakes to set up his strikes and grappling. He needs to set up his big power with some more framing punches, jabs, and stuff to keep fighters from just looking for that. Pressure and power game are going to be significant in this fight for Trinaldo. As I said, his power takedowns and aggressive top game are simply going to be too much for Hallmann, who's never faced a fighter on this level. And I've got Francisco Trinaldo to defeat Peter Hallmann, and I'll take Trinaldo by submission. Returning to the flyweight division, we have a battle of the number 1 ranked flyweight in the world, Joseph Benavidez, 18-3-0, battling former number 1 ranked flyweight and now number 5 ranked flyweight in UFC, Jussier Formiga, 15-2-0. Formiga, coming off his first UFC victory over Chris Carriazo, he debuted with a knockout loss against John Dodson. Well, Benavidez has won back-to-back fights since dropping his title fight loss to Demetrius Johnson. He's now 3-1 in the UFC as a flyweight. Now, this is a matchup of Nova União versus Alpha Male, and most always in these matchups, Nova União has got the best with guys like Aldo and Barao taking on the Uriah Faber and the other Alpha Male guys. Winner of this fight potentially gets a title shot as well. Keep that in mind. Benavidez trying to get back to a rematch with Johnson. Formiga wants to reestablish himself as a top flyweight. So winner of this could be right there on the cusp of a shot. Physically, 1-inch height advantage and reach advantage for the Brazilian. Take that into account, but again, I don't think that's going to be that big of a deal, as Benavidez has been fighting bigger men all of his life. Joseph is 8-0 in fights ended by submission, so very good grappler. He's wrestling based. His numbers aren't spectacular on the mat, 1.29 takedowns and only 25%, but a 53% takedown defense, which is quite good. He scored 2 takedowns in his last fight against a very good grappling fighter and worked his ground and pound, which is quite impressive. He's very effective at tying up and grapevining those legs when he can get on top, which neutralizes his opponent's ability to push him off. Will work from that front headlock position and transition to a guillotine choke. 4 of his 8 wins have come by guillotine, and that's that Alpha Male signature submission move. Now, we did see a couple guys. Demetrius Johnson nailed 5 takedowns against him, and Dominic Cruz in both of their matchups had 6 takedowns. So, people are capable of taking him off his feet. He shut down everyone else, essentially. So the big question is, can Formiga get this fight to the ground? Now, Jussier is a high-level grappler, 7 wins by submission, and many other grappling-based decision wins. So very good on the mat. We saw in that Carriazo fight. He went 4 for 8 on takedowns, very smothering, advances position, neutralizes his opponent off the ground, or off their back. 2.44 takedowns at 31% for the Brazilian. So again, very good numbers there. But we saw in his debut what happens, how ineffective he can be when he can't get the fight to the ground. He was 0 for 5 against John Dodson, and his only other career loss was against Ian McCall. He took McCall's back early in that fight in round 1, number 1, but after that, Uncle Creepy kind of settled in, shut everything else down, and won that fight as a result. As I said, takedowns are a key for Formiga to win this fight. His striking is improving, but again, his grappling game is essential for him to win this fight. Benavidez has power, and his striking is improving. He's been working with Wayne Ludwig. We've seen results for all the alpha male guys in that category, and Benavidez is no exception. 5 wins by knockout. He has very fast hands, decent combinations. He likes to slash a little with his punches. He's cleaning that up a little bit, but still can be effective at cutting guys or just hurting them with those quick little slashing punches. He gets a little bit wild, but he should have a big advantage on the feet, and I expect to see that in this matchup. He needs to avoid, as I said, getting reckless and giving up takedowns to his opponent, because you cannot afford to let Formiga get top position against you. Jussier, 0.77 strikes landed per minute, which is not a good set of numbers. He's not really a great striker. Benavidez, 2.93, so big advantage there if this does go to the judges, which I don't think it will, to tell you the truth. Benavidez wins over guys like Eddie Wineland, Miguel Torres, Ian McCall, Yasuhiro Shitani. He was very close against Dominic Cruz, so he's held his own against very good strikers. He's also faced some very good ground game fighters in Darren Uyanoyama, which he stopped with a TKO. Also, Haniyanya TKO'd. He submitted Wagner Fabiano, which really put him on the map. And he also submitted Miguel Torres. Benavidez overall is just the better athlete. He's more well-rounded. And my prediction is Joseph Benavidez to defeat Jussier Formiga by TKO. Our co-main event takes place in the UFC's middleweight division. It's a fight I'm very much looking forward to, as the number 3 ranked Yushin Thunder Okami and former UFC title challenger with a record of 37-0 battles at number 5 ranked Ronaldo Jacare Souza, former Strikeforce middleweight champion with a record of 18-3-0 with 1 no contest. Souza has won 4 in a row since dropping his title to Luke Rockhold, while Yushin Okami has won 3 in a row, and arguably it could be 4 in a row had he not, fallen apart in the final round against Tim Boetsch in a fight he was clearly well on his way to winning via decision. Now, Okami, I expect him to have a little jump in his step coming into this, as Chris Weidman took the title from Anderson Silva. So, after he got beat by Silva, not a lot of people were clamoring to see him get a rematch, but now new champion, new opportunities to compete for the title, and he knows a win here puts him right in the mix on the cusp, especially if Weidman retains that title. Now, Okami is a huge middleweight. Now, the stats would suggest otherwise in this fight. He's going to have a 1-inch height advantage and only a 1-inch reach at disadvantage, but he's still a very physical middleweight, very big man. I think he'll have a slight size advantage over Jacare. Okami is a judo black belt. Jacare, on the other hand, a decorated BJJ black belt, and he's also a judo black belt as well, so very decorated grapplers here. Souza, 14 wins by submission. He's tapped out guys like Chris Camozzi, Ed Herman, Robbie Lawler, Matt Lindland, and Alexander Slamenko, which is very impressive. Improving wrestling and takedowns, 3.92 at 49%. Plus, he averages 2.14 subs per 15 minutes, so very active once he gets the fight to the ground. Physically, the Brazilian's very strong and quick, like side mount to attack from. We saw that against Herman with the Kimura. Very active, as I said, 13 first-round victories. He has the most trouble when his opponents can stop the takedowns or get up quickly, as we saw in the Luke Rockhold and Tim Kennedy fights. And the big question here is, can Yushin Okami shut down the takedowns of Jacare? Okami vastly improving wrestling game, working with Chael Sonnen. Excellent defensive base coming from that judo background. He's very strong in the clinch, and he's never been submitted in his career. Takedown defense, 84%. That's going to be put to the test here. Offensively, 1.9 takedowns at 48%, which is pretty good. 3.5. He went 3 for 5 against Hector Lombard. Was very smothering in that fight, and the Alan Belcher fight. We saw how good his top game is, but I think his focus here should be defending Jacare and forcing him to stand and trade with them. We've seen no takedowns scored against Okami in his last 5 fights, but it's not like he hasn't been taken down before. Nate Marquardt did take him down 3 times, and Chael Sonnen brutalized him. Took him down 4 times much earlier in his career. We've seen marked improvements since those fights. Flipping things around, Hector Lombard, who's a very good grappler, 0 for 3 in takedown attempts. Very good wrestler. Mark Munoz went 1 for 15, and Dean Lister, who's also a good grappler, 0 for 11, much earlier in Okami's career. So we know Yushin can shut down very strong grapplers. Alan Belcher and Nate Marquardt did have some success countering the takedown attempts and getting some good positions on the mat. And again, that's why I say Okami needs to focus on defense and his striking. Jacare, he's vastly improving his stand-up game. We saw him knock out Derek Brunson, and he's working at Black House, so it's not surprising working with those guys. He's not going to get better with his hands. As I said, he has decent hands, improving kicking arsenal, and he's more than just a grappler. His chin is a question mark. We saw Robbie Lawler rock him in that fight. And also, he got outworked by Tim Kennedy on the feet, getting outlanded 69-48, and Luke Rockhold outlanded him 104-63, and those were over 5-round fights. Now, Okami doesn't put up those big numbers, but he does a good job of limiting his opponents on the feet. Yushin uses a nice counter jab, which we saw against Lombard every time he tried to close the distance. Yushin manages the distance very well, controls the range, and fights at the range he's comfortable with, and his opponent usually is not. Good combinations, stiff straight punches, will throw some kicks, and he has power. 10 wins by knockout, even though we don't see it a lot in the UFC. His 3 losses, he's got 3 losses by KO against Anderson Silva, which, was shocking. And Tim Boetsch knocked him out in that bizarre uppercut clinch situation. We also, Hector Lombard hurt him late, and he faded in the 3rd round against Lombard and against Tim Boetsch. That's got to be a concern against a guy like Jacare, who can finish opponents. if you look at Jacare's resume, he's beat some low-level competition, so it's not exactly like he's a world beater. Chris Camozzi, Ed Herman, Derek Brunson, Bristol Morunde, Joey Villasenor, Matt Lindland, who's far past his prime. He beat Robbie Lawler, who's a welterweight fighting at middleweight. So not exactly a world beater. He arguably lost both his fights against Luke Rock. He lost to Luke Rockhold. He arguably lost against Tim Kennedy. Okami's been fighting higher competition. I think he's being overlooked here. I think he shuts it down and keeps this fight standing. And my prediction is Yushin Okami to defeat Jacare Souza by decision. Now we head to the main event of the evening as number 3 ranked Glover Teixeira, 21-2-0, battles unranked but on the cusp of the top 10, Ryan Darth Bader, 16-3-0. Teixeira has a mild winning streak of 19 consecutive fights going, including 4 straight fights to start his UFC debut, so kind of impressive to say the least. Ryan Bader, on the other hand, he's been a UFC mainstay for quite a while since winning the Ultimate Fighter. He's coming off a win over Vladimir Matyushenko, and he has won 3 of his last 4 overall with a Lyoto Machida knockout sandwiched in there. This fight was originally scheduled to take place at UFC 160, so a little bit of a layoff for Bader. Teixeira fought at 160 against James Tahuna. Bader did not, so Bader been out of action, but I think he should be fine for there. Bader, NCAA Division I wrestler and BJJ purple belt with 3 wins by submission, so a well-versed grappler. Takedowns 3.18 at 43% and a 50% takedown defense. Pretty good numbers there. He scored 4 takedowns against Rampage Jackson, was really important part of his winning that fight. Also 5 against Little Noggin. He had 3 against Keith Jardine. He's got pretty good ground and pound on the top. Conversely, Rampage did score a single takedown against Bader, put him on his back, and John Jones picked up 2 as well. And Bader does not like working off his back. He seems like a little bit of a fish out of water in that position. So the big question is, can Glover defend the takedowns of a very good wrestler, and can he take Bader down if he wants to, and to work his ground game? Glover, 100% takedown defense, but again, he hasn't faced somebody with Bader's takedown capabilities. Kingsbury 0-for-1 overall. Rampage Jackson attempted 4 takedowns, a lot of necessity after getting cracked on the feet a couple of times. Jackson went 0-for-4. Glover so far, he went 5-5 in takedowns against Rampage Jackson. He nailed 3 against Fabio Maldonado, and it only took him 1 against James Tahuna. He has brutal ground and pound. We saw that onslaught, that massacre against Maldonado, which was at points hard to watch. Very good on the top, very good on the bottom, and any position on the ground, Glover's dangerous. 3.12 takedowns at 75%, but again, he hasn't faced a really high-level grappler yet, or a good wrestler. He's a second-degree BJJ black belt, 6 submission wins, including wins over Kyle Kingsbury and most recently James Tahuna with that in his last fight. Bader's takedown percentage, one thing for his completions anyway, it drops off as the fight progresses, as he has a tendency to get tired, and that's a big problem for Bader. And he also has trouble with range and judging that distance. We saw it against John Jones, we saw it against Lyoto Machida, and it makes it hard for him to shoot for takedowns when he can't get inside the range that he's comfortable with. He had trouble taking a little knockdown, and he was successful in a couple attempts, but it took him a ton of attempts to actually get there, and that's a big issue if he starts gassing out, because this is a 5-round fight, remember. If he can't cover that distance, it's hard to shoot effectively, as I said, and Glover's going to have a 2-inch reach advantage and a superior striking advantage. One thing I look at, the grappling could cancel each other out. Maybe neither guy is able to get their grappling going, and as a result, it's a fight that takes place mainly on the feet. Teixeira, 12-1 in fights ended by knockout. He has very good hands, relaxed, quick combinations, and he hits very hard. His striking offensive versus defensive numbers very impressive. 4.69 strikes landed per minute versus only 1.96. So he puts up a ton, and he really does a nice job of shutting his opponent's offense down. Good boxing. He changes up his attacks well. He did get clipped by Fabio Maldonado and he saw his knees buckle, but I think he let his guard down and forgot the punching bag. He was going to punch back in that matchup, and it hurt him. But he did a good job of shutting Rampage's attacks down. Bader, 2.56 strikes landed per minute versus 1.54, which is pretty impressive. And he's 7-1 in fights ended by knockout. So he's got that big power right hand, and he's capable of landing it. He's not as technical as Teixeira, which is something to consider. 38% accuracy, and as I said, he will swing wildly and miss, and that takes a lot of his cardio and gives his opponents opportunities to counter. He only landed 7 punches of 32 attempts against Machida, and he got frustrated in that fight, and that was something that was a major concern. I think he's going to struggle here against a superior striker. He has run into punches in the past. He ran into, his chin's a major question mark. We saw him run into and get knocked out by Lyoto Machida with a counter. He got dropped by Tito Ortiz, and he lost Tito Ortiz when he rushed in and got dropped and then submitted. Neither fighter had ever gone 5 rounds, which is always a question mark. Bader's cardio, I think, could be worse with the big winging punches, and I think Glover does a nice job of keeping things a little more localized with his strikes, and that's better for conditioning. In my opinion, the Brazilian simply more well-rounded. He should be able to snuff out the takedown game of Bader, and even if he doesn't in the opening round or two, I think he can take this fight back over in rounds 3, 4, and 5. And I think he stops it. My prediction is Glover Teixeira to defeat Ryan Bader. I've got him doing it by TKO. So those are my 6 main card predictions for UFC Fight Night 28, Teixeira versus Bader. I can't wait. The fact that we have a lot of good fights coming up with Bellator and World Series of Fighting, and we don't see action in the UFC again until September 21st. I believe it's in Toronto with John Jones against Alexander Gustafsson. I look forward to the break. Again, UFC 164 is not taking place yet, so nothing to report there. Let's keep it rolling. Lots of good fights. I'm looking forward to these. I still have to go work on my prelim predictions, so make sure you go to Kamikaze Overdrive to check all of that out. I appreciate all of you who listen in. The Kamikaze Overdrive prediction tournament is almost into the final round. As of speaking of this, UFC 165 will be the final event for the semifinals, so make sure you check that out. So, again, thank you very much for listening. Kamikaze Overdrive MMA predictions.